Alright, this video is intended to show someone starting out what chords you should start learning, or someone that's just having a hard time memorizing several chords, some helpful methods on that. First off, I'm not going to explain how to play the chords in the video. You can look up the chord charts, and I'll post them on my blogspot site at guitar101ramstein.blogspot.com. I'll put the link in the video details here. So first, if you're just starting out and you look at how many chords there are on guitar, it's pretty overwhelming, and it seems like a lot to memorize. Really, your first step, the best way to do this, I found, this is how I teach, is first focus on your 5 open major chords. And easy way to remember what those are is think of the word caged. So we have C, A, G, E, and D. I'm going to show them in a different order though, but that way you're remembering what chords are there. You notice we're missing F and B. Those are not open chords, they're bar chords. And there's no open strings basically in a bar chord. With our open chords, if I play a G major, I'm fretting some strings, fretting my E and my A string and bottom E string, but D, G, and B are open. So that's why they're called open chords. Bar chords require most of the time to that 1 or 2 fingers hold down several strings at the same time. Like our major bar chord, my index finger has to hold down the top string and the bottom 2 strings, therefore it's got to hold down all 6 strings. And I'm going to be using the flat part of my finger for that, which we don't do in our open chords. Those will take a little bit more patience and a little bit more effort to get them down to work basically. So I'd say start with your open bar chords, your open major chords, or 5 open major chords. And the order I show them in sort of goes from easiest to hardest. It kind of varies from everyone, but also more or less following the string note names, just descending down the strings. So we'll start off with the E major chord, then A major, then D major, then G major. And I always show 2 versions of G major with 3 fingers. So this one, my middle finger is holding down the 3rd fret, index the 2nd fret of the A string, ring finger the 3rd fret of the bottom string. Everything else is open. And then there's another variation of G major. The G major chord, all these major chords are just 3 notes. It's the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note from the scale it comes from. So in the G major, we take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. We have G, B, and D. So what I'm doing with the second variation of the G major chord is instead of playing an open B string, I've got a B here already, and an open B string. So instead of playing that B again, I'm going to play a D instead on the B string by holding down that 3rd fret of the B string with my ring finger, and now my little finger will hold down the 3rd fret of the little E string, the bottom string. They don't sound very different unless you hear them back to back. Here's the 4-finger version, 3 fingers. Very hard to tell the difference unless you hear them back to back like that. When I first saw that, I thought, what's the point of learning? That's harder to do with 4 fingers, and what's the point? It pays off to learn both ways. For example, if we want to do a G to a D major, I used to find that a really hard chord change, and I was having a hard time with it. If I hold it down with 4 fingers, now this ring finger is already in place for where it has to be for my D major. I don't have to move everything completely. Otherwise, I'm going to have to move everything. Which is possible, but it can make things easier in the long run. Other things make it easier too. If I want to go to a G to a C add 9, I just move my top 2 fingers. I don't have to move as many fingers. And when I'm doing chord changes, I'm always looking for that kind of shortcut. Even ways to hold the chord a little differently if it's a certain chord change to make it easier so I don't have to move as many fingers. I call it like a pivot finger. For example, my E minor I'd hold with these 2 fingers normally, with my middle and ring finger. But if I'm going to a G major, I'm going to hold with my 1st and middle finger. That way my index finger is still there where it has to be for the G major. And if you see that compared to this, less movement makes it easier. Alright, so back to the chords you want to learn, back in order: E major, A major, D major, G major, C major. Once you have those memorized, that's your first step, and it's a pretty big step when you can get those to work. Usually when you're learning your chords too, don't just strum them. I'm going to take say a D major, and I'm going to strum it. And I might think that sounds fine, I'm doing it right. But what I'll also do is arpeggiate, play one string at a time, and if there's a string that's not working, I can find it. If I'm strumming, I might not hear that this B string, for example, is making that sound. So if I arpeggiate, I can make sure everything's working. I have another video up on like how to get your chords to sound good if you're having a hard time with that. So check that one out if that's an issue. Alright, so now that you got your major chords down, the next thing to move on to is our minor chords. And we're going to focus on E, A, and D right now. These three chords have very uniform changes to them, to change from a major to a minor to a seventh to a suspended four to a suspended second. So it's really easy to apply these rules instead of trying to memorize all these chords. First we'll look at minors for E, A, and D. C and G work a little differently, so those you will have to spend a little bit more time on. But for like my E major chord, E, A, and D, all of these, what I'm going to do to make a major chord minor is my finger closest to the ground, I'm going to subtract a fret. In this case, my E major chord, it's going down the strings 0, 2, 2, 1. This finger's middle finger, ring finger, index finger. So my index finger's on the G string, that's the finger closest to the ground. And I'm going to subtract a fret. It's on fret 1, so I just lift up to fret 0. And I just turn my E major to an E minor. Now for the A major, there's a few different ways to hold A major. Some people hold it like this, some people hold it like that, some people hold it like that, some people hold it like that. I'm going 1, 2, 3 down D, G, and B. And now it's my finger closest to the ground. I have to subtract a fret to make it an A minor. That's my ring finger. That's not really possible when I'm holding it like that. So I got to reconfigure how I'm holding the notes. I'm going to swap some places. So now my index finger is going to be able to cover that first fret. It was on the second fret, or I was on the second fret of the B string to make it A major. And now I can move my index finger to the first fret to make it an A minor. And from here I can easily go into an A major back and forth by just scooting my finger over. So once again, finger closest to the ground, we subtract a fret. Same thing with D major. Now it's my middle finger that's closest to the ground, and once again I can't reach that to the first fret like that, so I'm going to swap places with my index and my middle finger. Now my index finger, it was my E string that was on the second fret, that's the closest to the ground finger. I'm going to subtract a fret to fret 1, and I got a D minor. And once again, if I want to go quickly back to D major, I can hold D major a little differently now and use my index finger to get back to the second fret. Alright, so that's how you'll turn those three chords into minor real easily without having to memorize 3 individual chords. Just one simple rule. Finger closest to the ground, subtract a fret. So now we'll look at sus4 chords. Suspended 4 chords. It'll usually be abbreviated SUS4. Alright, it's going to be the opposite as the minor. Finger closest to the ground, we add a fret. So E major, the index finger is going to go from fret 1, I'm going to scoot it over to fret 2. A major, ring finger is closest to the ground on fret 2, I'm going to scoot it over to fret 3. D major, I could scoot that finger over, my middle finger on the bottom, on the high E string on the second fret, but I can also use my little finger. That makes it a lot more convenient, so I'll just go from fret 2 to fret 3 with my little finger and play a D sus4. Alright, then finally we have sus2 chords. From the sus4 chord, I'm going to add 2 more frets. This might be a stretch if you're not used to these. So from the 3rd fret, finger closest to the ground, I'm going to add 2 more frets going to the 5th fret. A sus4 to A sus2, it's finger closest to the ground on fret 3, so I'm going to move over to fret 5 for that string. And then the E sus4, it would be from fret 2 to fret 4. Alright, and finally for this technique we'll also look at 7th chords, dominant 7 chords. Now in my pattern, the finger that's in the middle of all 3 strings being held down, I'm going to subtract 2 frets. So for a E major, it's real simple. My ring finger on the 2nd fret of the D string, I'm going to lift off, subtract 2 frets to go to the open string. So E major, E7. A major, same kind of deal going on. We got the middle finger on second fret of the G string. I'm going to subtract 2 frets to fret 0 and just lift that finger. And our D chord, D major, same thing, finger in the middle, subtract 2 frets. Easy way to remember this too is that D shape. I would see it kind of like a triangle shape going 2, 3, 2. So we're like a triangle drawn on the fretboard. I'm going to turn that triangle around basically, so it's going 2, 1, 2. So that finger in the middle subtracts 2 frets again. I got to reconfigure my fingering. D major, D7. Alright, and you'll find a lot more things like that with different chords. Same like A minor. So I'm going to do A minor 7, finger in the middle, subtract 2 frets. E major, or sorry, E minor. Finger, now we don't have a finger in the middle because it's open fret where index finger would be. So it's my ring finger. It's still like the second note down basically. I got to subtract 2 frets. E minor 7. D minor, I'm going to middle finger in the middle of the pattern, subtract 2 frets. D minor 7. And this kind of method, you'll find it makes it a lot easier and a lot faster to learn new chords and to memorize them and to figure them out if you forgot them. Other helpful tricks for learning more chords, this is going to get into more add chords basically, and that's take the chords you know and try moving the shapes around. That'll work with a lot of our open major chords. So I could take like a D major and move it up the fretboard. 12 times till I return to a D major, just at a higher pitch. And I mean, you can make a lot of patterns real easy that way, just by like picking out some of the places that you like the sound of. So like and A major works the same way. It's really tricky holding it this way to move it up when the frets get smaller. So if I'm going like down the strings, finger 1, 2, 3, I'll swap places with my first and middle finger. So middle finger's on D, index finger's on G, ring finger's on B. And same with the E chord. Another thing to remember is E major, when you remember that shape, to do an A minor, it's the same thing, but instead you were going to start under the open A string. Some of the chords you can try that with, but it doesn't work. G major, if I try to move that over, it does not work. It sounds really bad. C major we can get away with. Some spots we have a lot of dissonance though. But starting rooting on the 3rd fret, which is C major, I can make a D add chord, 5th fret. And you can experiment with that way and learn a lot more chords just from what you already know without having to memorize a lot of stuff. From there, when you have your major chords, your minor chords, 7th chords, suspended chords down, you're going to be able to cover a lot of territory that way, and it'll play a lot of songs, millions of songs that'll use just those chords. From there you can look into more chords. There's tons out there, and you can kind of find specific styles of music will tend to use more. If you're playing jazz, you're going to be maybe using a lot more diminished chords and augmented chords. It's not a rule though. They'll work in all styles of music, and it's really cool to try to use more, to not just get stuck to using major and minor chords and 7th chords. They work, they're great, but they've been done a million times, and it's hard to make a pattern that's original that hasn't been done already just using those chords. So as you get your basics down, then you can just broaden your vocabulary as far as chords go.